As we discussed, around the interchange areas, we see much more dense retail-focused land uses. But in between these areas, we see much more mixed use, mixed residential and mixed commercial in these areas than is typical for this part of the U.S. It's also much more vertically dense than is typical in this part of the U.S. That turned out to be a really, really tough sell, because the notion of having 3- and 4-story buildings in an area that is trying to maintain its identity as a small hometown turned out to be a really, really difficult thing to sell. But finally, what convinced them to go along with and accept this, and we're just getting started in the implementation phase of this thing, is the notion that by keeping this density as tight into this corridor as we possibly can, and keeping this density as tight as we possibly can, and maintaining the balance, the governing dynamics between the land use and the transportation, they are creating for themselves a sustainable tax base that will allow them to protect their lower density small town character elsewhere in the community. Because as we found over the last few years with the dwindling tax revenues, residential, low density residential especially, which is typical in this part of the U.S., 2, 3, perhaps 4 units to the acre in residential areas, you will at best break even as far as the tax base and the cost for providing basic services. Industrial areas, I don't know how it works in other parts of the U.S., but any place I've ever been, people are willing to sell their souls to get industrial development in. And so there are all kinds of tax breaks, so it actually costs you money to bring in industrial development. Office isn't a terrible moneymaker. Retail has been the moneymaker. And with the downfall of the retail economy starting in 2008, that has been a completely unsustainable practice. We can't continue to afford to do that. So backing this land use plan back out of the access plan, which was derived from the traffic analysis, is the way that all of us think tankers have been telling people for 20 years the way we ought to be doing things. But it was a real departure from the text in actually conducting a project in this manner.